James. I'm here at the St. Louis Chess Club, most significant, biggest chess club on earth, and I'm in their dungeon streaming today. And let me just begin with the same spiel I give every month here. I created this show years ago to help people go over their own games, and it's been a real interesting journey. We've got several people now who have submitted their games again and again, and the skill that they've definitely improved at is the ability to at the very least write about their games. And my general hope is that if you can write about your games, talk about your games, just conceptually put some things forward, understand the kind of mistakes you made, that'll make you not only a better chess player, but will make chess more interesting, because the conceptual depth will be stronger. That won't stop us from making dumb moves. Dumb moves will still happen, blunders, but our game will be deeper. And as you'll see here, we're going to see several of our regulars put together some very interesting ideas going forward here. All right, so let's start. And certainly the game of the month here is Tim Westlund from Scandinavia, and he put together a really beautiful idea in the middle game that I'm going to take partial credit for him watching the show. He is playing a much higher rated player here, a woman. We don't know her name, but she is higher rated, and this helped him get a rating prize at a recent tournament. Tim has had on the show, number of setbacks, especially dropping pieces, and that's something, certainly first of all, he didn't do it this game, so it takes a certain amount of control not to drop the pieces. And then in addition to that, he's now able in this game to show some conceptual depth, which a lot of times, holds us, those of us, including myself, that miss basic things, that'll hold our chess back, even no matter what our conceptual level is, right? If we drop stuff, if we don't see resources of our opponent, that will hurt us immeasurably. Okay, let's get into it. So we get the Rossolimo, and it's a kind of a funny thing here. Tim takes immediately, and this is following in the footsteps of what we should call like the latest theory, or basically, regardless of what black does on move 3, white is going to take on c6 and just fix that pawn structure. And we saw this, of course, in the World Championship match with Fabi and Carlsen, and this same dynamic where you give away the bishop pair in exchange for a pawn weakness is in several modern openings, notably the Berlin defense as well. So two of the major openings now being played at the top level have this dynamic of a pawn weakness in exchange for the bishops. And I don't know if Nicholas knew it, but the way the setup that he plays here, excuse me, not Nicholas, Tim, the setup that Tim plays here is very deep. And let's just look at what it is. He plays d3, and there's I'll just put this in my own words here. What white is going to play for is to try to create a wall on the light squares, a wall of light square pawns, especially this pawn chain, that's going to try to cage in this unopposed light square bishop over here. And in general, long term, if black can make that a fighting piece, then she will really start ripping us open. So that's the danger. And the problem with the isolated pawns right now isn't so much that they're a weakness right now that we're somehow going to attack and win, but rather it makes her structure fixed. And that fixed structure is going to make it harder for her to bust her bishop out. If she can, she would, for example, like to bust with a move like c4. But we're gonna at least try to make that break hard to do. Okay, there's many moves that black could play here. I like what she does. She plays e5. And this grabs some space, and we're going to see she has an interesting idea. Now, Tim's next move is maybe an example of too much highfalutin stuff. He's clearly following some ideas when he plays this move. He plays h3. And this is very consistent with the idea of a light square wall. But of course, I'm not going to be into it because I'm a tempo fiend and we're giving away some time. And black actually plays a move I really admire after h3. I'm going to guess more to the point would be moves like knight c3 or castles. But we're going to see Tim wants to keep it flexible with the question of whether or not he's going to castle. Okay, so here we go. h3, and watch what she plays. A really nice move here. f5. Okay. Is c4, knight c3 an idea here? Maybe, but I like what he's doing. We just want to be solid in the center and put our pawns on the light squares. I think later we might do other funny things against the pawns, but right now I think we just want to set this wall up. And notice, this is our beautiful good bishop here. Pawns in the light squares. We got rid. That I should have mentioned that as part of the earlier as a main thing for what's going on here. There's this terrible hum down here in the St. Louis dungeon, and I don't know if I can get rid of it. You know what? I'm going to dash off an email to the famous Ben Simone, and maybe I can get something going here. So, just a second here. We got to get rid of this hum. It's killing me, even if it's not killing you guys. I'm just going to go Ben Simone, hum down here. Can you fix it? All right. So maybe he's going to come hang out with us, maybe not. In any case, let's go back to our business here. And f5, like I'm saying, I really admire because what it's striving to do with Federico the f-pawn is to bust open lines for this bishop who has some difficulty in coming out. And so this part of her game plan, really great. And I like it too because it seems a proper response to the move h3, which neglected the development a little bit, even though it is playing according to what I think is a good game plan. All right, here we go. Knight c3, knight f6. And this is the first moment you can feel like Tim doesn't quite know what to do here. And it isn't so easy. Black has a nice, posing some nice questions for us. And if I was white here, I was thinking about this a long time actually, because it is a hard question. I was tending towards opening the position like this just a little bit and trying to claim that she's going to have trouble going forward because it's going to be hard for her to move those center pawns, and maybe her king will be weaker. Now you ask why, and for example, I would play castles now. You ask yourself, well, why not castles immediately, let's say in this position? And the danger there is either now or very soon I'm going to be worried about f4. And this is going to be important for our game, this idea of f4. Opening up the bishop and getting really King's Indian style counterplay against our king. It's not even counterplay, it's just play, because white doesn't have all that much play. And black is going to aim for some kind of g-pawn rush and to bust us open using the lever of the h3 pawn. That all looks incredibly scary, honestly. So that's why I took first on f5. And this question, though, for black, we're going to see it's real interesting. Should she push or not? And what I came out of this analysis was that black shouldn't push until white commits to the king side, right? And we're going to see that in the game. So bishop g5, Tim says he likes bishop d2 better. And now he thinks, now Tim thought that black should have played f4 to lock us out, and maybe, but we haven't committed to the king side yet. So I'm going to say her move has to be okay. Queen e2, h6. And I agree with Tim here. This seems like it's maybe too much. And what we're going to see, though, is for whatever reason, she has a disinclination here to castle, right? There's something about the way she's approaching this position, and I don't really totally understand what it is, but I can just sense that she doesn't want to castle. We'll see that here and then in the next couple moves. So what should she do? She should castle, and I think she has a great game. If white ever castles, then we will play f4, and if we go this way, then I believe we're at some point just going to take here, with the notion that everything is open, including that king over there on the queen side. So h6, bishop d2. I like it. I like it. We don't want to give up that bishop. And now this is the period of the game. It's real interesting where black begins to drift. And a lot of it has to do with her unwillingness to play castles. Now we should note, it's castles, and in general a position that has to start worrying about knight h4 now. Yeah, we're going to look at that in a second. But still, castles, right? Castles! Get out of there! And use the whole dream of Federico the f-pawn is to get play on the f-pawn. Okay, so here we go. This next move is a typical, I don't want to call it a mistake, but it's a typical thing that I've seen. I've played this move in blitz games in similar structures, rook b8, and it feels like you're doing something. But here's where I think Tim really just plays the idea of the position here, which is b3. Building a wall on the light squares so that the bishop can't do anything. The unopposed light square bishop. That's the cage that we're creating for that beast. Okay. By the way, an interesting move here that I wondered about was, could white get away with knight h4? Alright. b3. And now black makes a mistake. She plays f4. And I think this is a good, it's a really interesting question where first of all, rook b8, it looks like a developing move, but it doesn't do that much. And in this position, she doesn't know what to do and makes this very committal decision. And I think what we should say is there are certain players who, for example, if you play the King's India, you are going to be naturally drawn to this move f4. And at first glance, it wasn't clear to me that it was necessarily a bad move. And actually, the reason it wasn't clear to me is it wasn't immediately evident to me that white's king is going to be totally happy on the queen side after f4. I'm not so sure the king is totally happy if the pawn is still on f5. So, for example, f4 was played in the game, but imagine we just castle, for example. So b3, and then we just castle. If castles now, I think we take. Yeah, I think we take, and let's say pawn takes. Now after a move like bishop e6, I'm going to start thinking about c4. And it's now not so easy. Now this bishop e6, c4 stuff wouldn't be nearly as strong if I was castled short. And so it's a really good example of two different structures that black should have in mind, depending on where the white king goes. Alright, f4, castles, exclam, right? Once the pawn commits to f4, boom, we castle long. And when we think about the strategy that white has here, I think we could say he's waiting with the king, and this can be infuriating for people playing against you because they don't know if you're going to stay or you're going to go this way or that way. There's three options that they have to keep in their head, and you can see it's like that f5 pawn. It really needs to know where the king's going to go before it moves. For example, if you castle, well, let's just say, I don't know, we castle this way, and we castle short, then boom, f4 for sure. right? And the business is coming. Every King's Indian player appreciates this kind of stuff, right? It's going to come. Okay. B3, F4, castles exclam. Now, the next several moves, we're going to see black clearly loses the thread in terms of a plan. And we've all had this experience, right? Where, you get some position, and there's a great phrase where we say mistakes come in pairs. And they don't mean pears the fruit, they mean pairs as in two things. And generally it's not just two, but it'll be a series of moves. You'll continue to make mistakes, as she does here. It's more than one, where you're drifting because you don't know you don't really understand what to do in the position. And you only really stop drifting until your opponent's kind of punched you in the face and you wake up and you're like, oh no, what's going on here? So let's see. Bishop e6, it looks like a good move, but the question is, what does it do? G3, exclam, for sure, let's open some stuff up. And the problem with the King's Indian move, which would be G5, is when I take now and put a rook on the G file, where is this king going? In the King's Indian, oftentimes it's safe, you can hide it over here, but it's not getting there so easy now. So black is officially in a little bit of trouble now, especially in terms of a plan. And I think her next two moves are a great example for anybody of just, you wonder what does drift look like, and it looks like this. You play knight d7, g4, very good, and then knight b6, right? The knight doesn't know what it's doing on knight b6. Now here's just a beauty. Let's pause for a second. Look at Tim following the principles of this opening. Fabiano and all the greats who've played this opening would be proud. Completing the chain opposed to this bishop, and a chain as well which allows the unopposed dark square bishop to really shine. Okay. King can go to d7. Maybe it should have gone to d7. Absolutely right. Yeah, black should have castled. So now, here's where we're going to get to the part of the game. Knight b6 is a mistake. We're going to get to the part of the game that I'm really impressed with Tim's play here. So, rook dg1. And, by the way, here, we're going to have a couple games where somebody's playing a much higher opponent, as in this game. The famous Matt Tripati is going to be on later, and he's clearly terrified. But watch this. White is not terrified at all here, and really brings the fight. So rook dg1, he wants to play g5. Black makes what seems like a sensible move, g6. Okay, so she's saying, if you play g5, I'll play h5. And here's a great move here, knight h4. And he's already envisioning the madness which is about to happen. Now, first of all, before we get into variations, I just want to make a couple notes. This piece isn't working. It's terrible. This piece is not only not great, but it's blocking the queen to defend the king in any kind of lateral way, for example, like this. The rook unclear, the king just so uncertain now, scrambling in the box. Whereas this king, even though it's a little drafty, there's no way to get at him. And the bishop on d2 is also really a strong piece in terms of a defender. Okay, bishop f7. And let's read what Tim wrote. I did not yet know if a draw would be enough for me to win a rating prize, but it was probably so. However, I decided to go for it with the bold piece sack knight f5. As conservative play is often not the way to make a draw. And who said I was trying to make a draw anyway? I wanted more. This was a purely intuitive sacrifice, and the point is that I need to get to her king somehow. However, as mentioned previously, the piece sack can be declined. Okay, now the most important thing that I like about this is you're absolutely right that we have to get at the king, that's the issue. And there's reasons to think that we're going to get away with it. And maybe we're going to get at them in a second. However, it is not a mistake to be. I guess you wrote here that someone was critical of you for doing this. Is that right? At some point, I remember reading that in your notes. By the way, great notes. But this is fine. This knight f5, and let's just say that if she declines the sacrifice, right? And there's so many different moves that she could play. She could play, I don't know, knight d7, rook somewhere, so many different things. The thing to realize then is at the very least, you can take this, start invading on f6 and the f file in general. And very important to note that it will at that point be opposite color bishops. And the opposite color bishops just mean whoever got the initiative is going to be better. And in general, the side with the side with the better king is going to have much better chances to get the initiative. Now she thinks about it forever and snags your piece. All right, let's look at this beautiful sacrifice. And where I really want to chime in here is that it really is intuitive in the sense that I don't think it's reasonable to ask white to calculate everything out here, right? I think at the most you want to just say, this is really going to open up her king. My rooks are going to be active behind these pawns. f6 and g6 are both terrifying moves. And this is one of the most important things that makes me believe this is going to work, that we've got knight e4. And one thing I neglected to say earlier was simply that knight is a poor piece over there on c3. Yeah, everybody's liking your move, Tim. This is real chess here. It really is. Okay, so black gets maybe the one bad sign is she does get to bring in her terrible knight. But here we go, f6. Now, honestly, maybe you could do other things too, like knight e4. Actually, I don't think there's any rush. That might even be cleaner. But what you did is fine, because she has to now give it back. And it's a real interesting position. I think, if I just got this in a game, I would certainly be happy, but I wouldn't know for certain, like, am I winning or something? But the more I looked at it, I just said to myself, this is just totally winning. Because the king has no safe spot. The king has absolutely no safe spot, and black has no counterplay. So yeah, I think this is over. And your play from here on out is very intuitive. Bishop e7, maybe she has better than that, but okay. Rook g7, very nice. Rook hd1. Now I do think she makes it easy for you here by taking, because I think you wrote too. You said, this I think was a serious error, as now the white squares and black's camp turn into Swiss cheese. This is probably the time pressure that is starting to crack her. Okay, but I do want to stress, Tim, she is cracked already. There is no way long term that I think black can survive this. And in fact, one just dirty trick move that we have up our sleeves here is we can play c4 soon to just force her to take. And when you think about her position, there's not really much she can do to even try to improve the position, Like, how would she improve the position, right? I see no way. Okay, so bishop e4, queen e4. She runs. We say check. It's obviously over. Very nice. She runs more. And then we got a nice mating pattern here. Checkmate. Beautiful, Tim. That was fantastic. Yeah. So nice. All right. So, beautiful game. I'm really happy, Tim, and I'm hoping, I hope this show, contributed at least some to this glorious victory. I really think too, that when you think about chess on a practical level, it's not just the beauty that you brought to the table, but when you can play a conceptual sacrifice like that, you become just a much more dangerous player, you know, against no matter who. So we're going to see some other games where, you know, the lower rated player had some nice attacking prospects, and you got to just go for it. You got to go for it, yeah. And I would say this, you know, I've beaten some players who I consider just simply much stronger than myself, and this is the way to do it, right? Start the fire. Start the fire. All right, our first 3 games today, I organized it so that they are going to be attacking games. So we have Tim, and then next up we have Nicholas, also from Scandinavia. And let's look at how this goes. The beginning might not look to some like an attacking opening. But this is usually called the Colley system. And I would say in my day, when I was a kid, in the same way now that you see the London being played all the time, it was the Colley system that everybody liked to play. And I really like this move order that White has chosen here. Now let's just say that, first, before we get into it too much, that there's a lot of similarities with the London. First of all, it's very solid. And instead, in the London, of committing and it's the same pawn structures, they come up in the London, but instead of committing the bishop to f4, where it might not actually belong and where it might get pegged by some kind of knight h5 exchange, White in the Colley just leaves it on c1 for a moment, and I think looks to play e4. But we're going to see, I think Nicholas has some different ideas. But I do want to say, I think this is a totally fine opening to play. And if you did it on a practical basis, like in the London, people are going to throw different setups at you. But I think unlike the London, they'll be less drilled in what those setups are, because anybody who's playing chess at the tournament level now is going to be having to face the London. Okay, I think Black should play c5 here, but that's also fine for Black. I think it could look like this maybe. And actually a good point to note here is what we've transposed into here is a Slav with White up a tempo, right? And this can be a very dangerous attacking structure because we're looking to play e5. And of course this bishop isn't fixed yet. Okay, so I still think Black should play c5 though, because after b6, I think what Nicholas misses here is that either on this move or the next, he should play e4. Without a doubt. And the point is simply that now you've achieved the goal, I think, of the Colley, which is this e4 break. And it's also the dream of the Slav. But notice, we haven't played our c2 pawn. Oh, and so I actually made a big mistake, actually. In this position, you are 2 tempi up. Very important, excuse me. You are 2 tempi up on the structure normally that Black gets. Maybe I'll just show that briefly here. So d4, d5, c4, c6, let's say knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, e6, e3, knight bd7, bishop d3, snip, snop, snag, castles, let's say castles, e4, e5. This is a well-known theoretical position where Black is fine. So when you compare it to what we could have got in the game, what do we got here? or excuse me, we were looking at this position. Yeah, just much improved. And the threat of e5 is very significant, where we're going to get some drama against the h7 pawn. Okay, so b6, queen e2, bishop b7, and Nicholas, maybe we're going to say later that you made some mistakes, but this is the mistake I really want you to focus on. It's a mistake I see a lot of my students do. I have several students who play the London, and what they often do is they do what you do here, which is they reflexively play certain moves, and that move is often c3, also in the London. Okay, so what I want you to see, what you're doing here with c3, is you're completing the comfort triangle, right? The comfort triangle that is familiar to all Kali players and all London players. But there's no point at this juncture to play c3. There's absolutely no point, right? And if you had played e4, now I don't think black gets to play c5 so easily, right? And so, yeah, this is a nice, this is a really good moment to reflect on, and everybody does it, right? Everybody has habitual moves, and one of the main points of going over your games is to get rid of those habitual moves. And maybe one reason your mind didn't reach for e4, and let's talk about it. This is just a guess. But you were not, perhaps maybe not convinced that this was an advantage for white. But I want to assure you that it is. For example, if we get this position, and I don't know, it's very difficult actually for black now here. You've got a space advantage, and it's even an advantage that you've got the pawn still on c2. There's a lot of similar structures in d4, c4 openings where the pawn's already on c4. But there's no need for the pawn to be on c4, and we might later want that pawn to be on c3 to protect this guy. But here we have space, development, and at least one bad piece in the queen over here. All right, so there it is. What I try to do in these things is to focus on one chief sin, and that is we all make mistakes, but some mistakes are more worth thinking about and trying to edit from your system. And for sure, the habitual moves that you continually make in the opening, you definitely want to fix, if for no other reason than that it's a creative problem when we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, right? Okay, long talk over. Here we go. c3, c5. And here, there's an interesting thing that Nicholas writes. Here white should choose one of two standard plans. He can either play dc followed by e4, in which case c3 doesn't make that much sense, but okay. Or he can play knight e5 followed by f4. And here we're going to get this very ambitious knight e5. By the way, in the stream, you can see I've got the notes that people have written for themselves. And the intention there is so that people can see what other people wrote as I was speaking. A lot of times I don't have the time to read it all out, but I think there's a lot of things that people are writing that are very interesting. I'm considering, well, it's suggested to me that I write a book on how you analyze your own games, and this is very interesting material, honestly, that we have going back years now of people submitting their games, and yeah, it's a rich material that you can go back and read, especially maybe you're watching this show and you don't know or feel comfortable about submitting your own games. Reading that is a whole instruction in itself that's been put out there, so it's really interesting. Okay, let's get back to the game, and let me read a question. How do you tell the difference between loose theory plans of responses, like in the kid or perk, and those reflexive moves to get rid of? The simple reason or thing to ask is, does C3 have a point, right? Does it help us? And honestly, I don't think it does in this position. Kind of a humorous aside on that is, a lot of times in the London, when you already have your bishop on F4, some of my students will want to play E4. And oftentimes it's not terrible, but it's really important to see that E4 is so much more important to play at some point here than it is in the London, right? Okay. Now, one thing I want to say it's real interesting is first of all, with C3, I think White gave up on his chance for an advantage. And so, regardless of what we do here, I think Black should be able to find some kind of equality. But I like that what Nicholas had here in his mind was a kind of vocabulary of plans. And I think for learning and opening, and this might get to your question, one of the most important things to have is like an awareness of different ways of playing. And especially in positions like this with a London or the Colley system, where you want to have different ways of doing things, because the position is always going to be a little bit different, and so you want to have ways of addressing those differences. Okay, so thank you, Vishnu. Yeah, I want to write about this. It would be fun. So knight c6 is a mistake, and we're going to see, actually, I'm just going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say his opponent is now following a plan that he's seen in the London system, and he's trying to transpose to that plan, and that's why he's doing this. So this is another example of a habitual move, and Nicholas correctly points out that stronger would have been knight d7, f4, and knight e4. Simple and strong, and Black is totally fine. And the metaphor that I like a lot, maybe now it's because I have kids, is I like to think of this knight as having the bishop as his helicopter parent. You got these parents that just hover around their kids all the time, and the bishop is living through the knight. Okay, so if you imagine that bishop, you can think of it as a bad piece, but the second he's helping the knight out on e4, he's all of a sudden very strong, or at least he has a role to play. And if this piece ever gets taken, then the bishop's scope really does get expanded, and even dreams of, having the full diagonal at his disposal. And this idea of knight e4 is what Black is going to dream of when he plays knight c6, but that he doesn't get. Now let's see if I can create, actually let's just show next couple moves, and I'll try to create the other position that I believe Black had in the back of his mind. So f4, bishop d6, g4, very good, knight e7, and very nice move, queen f3. Why is it a nice move? We need to keep the knight from coming to e4, right? If the knight had gotten to e4, our attack is really over and the bishop will participate. If it doesn't come to e4, the bishop's not participating and the attack is just beginning. All right, let me try to show quickly the plan I was thinking of. So let me get this right. So let's say knight f6, bishop f4, e6, e3. There's many different move orders this can take, but usually it goes something like this. Bishop d6, bishop g3, castles, bishop d3, c5, c3, knight c6, let's say castles, b6, knight d2, queen e7. Now, Black is threatening e5, knight e5. Oh, wait, I blew it. Sorry. Excuse me, I got to get it right. Queen c7. Now, it's important to see that you've got to play b6 before you play queen c7, otherwise there's dc. Wait, I'm blowing it now. See, maybe I told you I wasn't gonna get it perfect. No, you need to play knight e5 here. Excuse me, knight e5, bishop b7, knight d2, queen c7. Here we go, f4, and now knight e7. Okay, so this is the typical plan against the this particular setup in the London that a lot of black players are using. Carlsen, as black, has used this. And there's a lot of interesting theory from this point on, let's say, but it is a balanced position. And black, is of course hoping to do things like knight f5 and knight e4. And you can see it's very similar to the London position. It's just that this bishop isn't over here, right? Okay, we got the famous Ben Simon in the building, and he's trying to fix the hum. Yeah, it's terrible, right?
It seems louder than usual, but I'll ask about it, but there's nothing I can do right now.
All right. All right, everybody, we are stuck with the noise. Maybe you guys don't hear it as bad as I do. All right, let's go back to the game. And one of the things I like about that example is it shows that there's a definite similarity to ideas in the London to ideas in the Colley system. So if you ever feel like you've had enough in the London, this is a natural switch for you to make, to go to the Colley system. All right. Queen c7, and I think black is in big trouble here and needs to maybe consider the odd-looking g6. Just so that if g5 comes, we can play knight h5 and to stop play on this diagonal. Is he still in trouble, though? Absolutely. White has some of his own interesting problems, though, and that they are really that this knight can't move until this knight has been dislodged from e4, right? Because otherwise the knight and his terrible helicopter parent comes in to deal with stuff. After this, though, when we kick the knight from f6, I think white is in full charge of this position. And okay, let's look. Let's say that white's first move looks right to me, queen h3, and black's next move looks wrong, but I think he is already in significant trouble. He plays knight g6. It doesn't look right. Now, g6 is what Nicholas writes black should have done, and says knight g4, knight f5, unclear. I'm going to say I like white's position here a lot. And I don't believe it's unclear. I think white is definitely better. It's just, but g6 certainly an improvement over knight g6. I wouldn't describe it as a slight concession. I think black's in big trouble. And the general problems here for black, I would say, is that these pieces aren't helping on the defense. This guy's awkward, and we're very close to mating black. So, knight df3. And let's read what Nicholas wrote, because I think it's pretty interesting here. Simply completing development, preparing bishop d2 and rook e1, improving the pieces before going further on the king side. White has a grip on the center and the king side but without anything decisive in sight. White must be patient and hope the pressure yields unforced errors. Black is stuck without a clear plan, and any attempt on the queen side looked very slow. Instead of knight f3, rook f3 was an alternative with the idea of queen h5 and rook h3. And that's the move that definitely pops out to me. I have a hard time imagining that he's going to survive after rook f3. I think it's all over. And this is like, I guess I would call it a very standard Stonewall style attack. And the reason I feel pretty good about it is I agree with you, first of all, that we're not fully engaged, and these two pieces in particular aren't there. But I don't see black fixing his king problems. I really don't. Yeah. So I think queen h5, rook h3 is absolutely deadly. Now, you are right, though, that on this move, knight df3, you are still in charge. But the bummer about it is it's a little bit hard for me to say how you intend to mate the guy, right? I want to stress, this is really this is really terrible. One other just simple and dirty trick that he has to worry about here is at some point you just taking on g6 and saying, oh no, you can't play fg because of that. So bishop g6, hg, and these are really hard positions to avoid getting mated on because of some kind of queen h4, rook f3. And of course you can still do this bishop g6 idea after rook f3. So yeah, I didn't turn on the computer or anything, but I believe it is over after rook f3. Okay, let's look. So like I said, these first three games I wanted to really focus on because they give real insight into what playing an attack and building up an attack means. And maybe before I leave this position, I'll say that one of the arts that you learn in going over your games is you will get certain positions like this that I'm going to call a critical position. And all I mean by that is to say that this is where, I was going to say something dumb like the rubber meets the road or whatever, but it is the moment where things are decided now for both players. And that's why you need to spend some time in really figuring out and calculating. It is scary to play rook f3 on a practical level. I totally agree with that sentiment. And the thing I'll say about the practical element of this is that it's really important to sense when the critical moment comes, because that's when you need to be able to allow yourself to think deeply about what's going on. Because it's easy for me to say rook f3, but of course you're going to have to put yourself in black shoes and say to yourself, well, what is he going to do? He's obviously not just going to instantly resign, right? And so you have to try to imagine what the guy could possibly try out, in these positions. For example, if rook f3, maybe he could try out this sad-looking rook e8. And there's all kinds of spicy moves we have here. We could consider knight takes f7. We could consider, though, this is an obvious one. There's no knight f8 here because of this guy, so knight f8. And here the good news, I think, is we just play rook h3, and then we go on with our plan. Then we go on with our plan. Oh, buddy. Yeah, but something like that, we would want to maybe think about it. So again, the thing I want to say is people who don't go over their games don't know how to sense the critical moment when they need to think. And they need to see when they study their score sheets that there's certain moves that you want to make instantly, right? It's not like I'm advocating thinking forever. Just on certain moments you need to train yourself to be like, right, this is where the critical decision is going to be made. Okay, let's go back to the game. Black takes, I'm going to say that's controversial, and it's controversial because when we think of any time you play with Federico the f-pawn, the problem with Federico the f-pawn is he's in the way of our bishop and our rook. But the dream of Federico the f-pawn is to get out of the way for the bishop or the rook, and the rook, I should say, right? So white makes a natural move here that's a mistake. And, one funny thing about the mistake is maybe white was motivated partly by the notion that after this f3 square is cleared, we can do rook f3. But for certain, after fe, let's say bishop e7 is forced, White has a fantastic position. I think there's going to be more than one move, but if you find nothing else, you play queen g4 and h4, h5. And yeah, you can start off with bishop d2 as well. So this move is going to allow black to trade some stuff off. And this is surprisingly going to be surprisingly competent from black. So, and it's a real interesting attacking situation. So let's say that one problem that just happened for white is by trading off, especially that second minor that we didn't have to trade off, black has reduced our forces to really 3 attacking pieces, right? This guy, of course, is really hard to figure out how he's going to come into the game. And black, I think, blunders in the next move, but we're going to see it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that he blundered. So let's look. Rook a5, rook f4, good. Bishop a6, and Nicholas writes, question mark, falling into a trap. Queen e7 equals. And maybe queen e7 is certainly better, but here's the interesting thing. I'm not actually sure that bishop takes g6 is the right move. Yeah, kind of interesting, right? Yeah, I'm not sure you actually want to take that thing. So I think, just intuitively, I'm going to say I like this move better. But we're going to have to look. Because obviously, so what happened? Let's look. White said, oh, I'm winning a pawn. Because on hg, we have this body blow here with rook h4. And it's basically over. So f takes, snip. Now it probably felt good to steal that pawn. But now our light squares are a wreck. And I think it's fair to say that it's very difficult to now judge this position. Very difficult. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. So let's look. It went snip, snip, queen c4. And the difficulty is just that our light squares are falling apart here. And right, I have no idea what's going on. As you've probably heard me say several times before, when the bishops of opposite color on the board are on the board, it's the side who has the initiative that has the advantage. Or rather, you could say that the value of the initiative is always there, but goes up dramatically when we have the bishops of opposite color. Because the problem is, for black, that the bishops of opposite color mean that if black gets an attack on the light squares, he's basically up a piece there. And you can feel like this white king is very drafty all of a sudden. And this bishop c3 is really a pawn. So, in his notes, Nicholas writes that b5 here would be better. And I guess I'm inclined to agree with that. So, rook f8, rook e1, and now Nicholas says you need to try queen c8. And he says only a small advantage to white. I think black is fine. I'm going to go ahead and say I think black is fine. Because your bishop's all on the wrong color, right? And you have no way of doing any business. For example, here, I don't know, we can go chase this honey down. Yeah, there's a total blockade on the light squares. Okay, so let's see how it went. I'm enjoying these first 2 games so much, I'm spending too much time on them. Thank you for the pawn, my friend. Check, check. Uh-oh. And now it's basically all over. Queen f7, very nice move. Check to the miserable king, and he resigns because the e-pawn is going to roll. So very nice game, Nicholas. And I would love to even talk about it more. But remember, I think, and this goes for a lot of people who play the London, the Collie, and other things, the habitual moves that don't make any sense in the position, but just you're playing them because you're used to it, those are really important moves to beat yourself up over. And so what I like to do in these lessons here is I don't want to tell you that beat you up about all kinds of things, but I want to beat you up over the important things. And the important things are things like that. And what I mean by important is just situations that you want to stop doing, right? Because there's always going to be loads of mistakes in any game, right? But there's certain mistakes we want to really focus on, and the habitual ones is definitely on that top rank of things that we want to stop doing. Okay, Kevin Lee is back with a very exciting game, and oh man, here we go. A lot of, these first three attacking games are a real doozy here. So here we go. My understanding, although I'm no expert, is that this is theory, and my understanding is that the move e5 is the critical one for black to play here. I think there's some crazy variation that goes something like that, and then of course it's too complicated for me at that point about what's going on. Maybe, I don't even know, maybe c5 happens. It just turns into a whole mess. Okay? I think actually that's the move. I'm not an expert, but I believe there's been some GM games that kind of looked like this. So a5, and it looks really wrong, this a5 move. It looks too slow, and now h4 comes. So like I was saying, with the bishops of opposite color, is that in those positions the value of the initiative rises, and a more obvious example of that is these positions with castling on opposite sides, right? The value of the initiative skyrockets. Okay. Now, I have to read a kind of these comments. I was talking so much about these interesting games that I haven't been able to see everything. Yeah. Vishnu writes, didn't Spassky say that one of the things Fischer wasn't the greatest at was sensing critical moments? Absolutely. I thought that was very interesting. Yeah. And I think part of it was that Fischer didn't really ever have a teacher. You know, he was learning from the books. Okay. All right. So, let's go back. I am too weak to watch. What is the target demo for this stream, the demographic? I hope you're not too weak to watch. I want to say these first three games really are on a pretty high level. We have people, though, I would say, in this, people who submit their games, a very wide range. We have, I would say, in this particular show, we have a skill level from, let's say, 2,300 to 900, right? So I don't my goal anyway is to try to be able to talk to anybody at their level. Okay, so here we go, h4, a4, and, you know, let's talk about level here for a second, because this next mistake that white makes, it's not immediately obvious, and these positions with castling on opposite sides, the price for the reason we have to be really careful is the price for a mistake is simply higher, because it's going to be so much about speed, right? And speed is just such a tricky animal. So king b1, we're going to see it has points, and a lot of these positions it's certainly a reasonable looking move to make. We've got the gnomes at the chess club working on the noise. That's to hear in the background. The famous Ben Simon and Danny Machuca. So what I'm going to say is that it was unnecessary, and certainly this move had to be right, h5. And I don't think black survives this. For example, let's say he continues this knight a5 business. Let's take, and both recaptures are sad, and then we stick this guy in, and I think that's it. I think that's it. We are simply faster than this guy on the attack. So king b1, knight a5, queen c1. So we can see the king going to b1 did have a point, right? And one thing about the way black plays this now that's interesting is he's just letting white have it, right? He's like, you want to come in and do your thing, that's fine. And he has a very interesting idea. On the surface, this position seems to me like white is much better, but we're going to see it's pretty tricky. So queen c1, snip, snip, b5, and it looks like h5 is crushing. But I think, whether it was intentional or not, black's playing g5 is very clever in this position. We sacrifice the pawn, and by doing so, we take this rook out of the game, at least for the moment. And as we said with the bishops, the value of the initiative has now gone up dramatically, that we have opposite sides castling. And I was surprised when I studied this game that I found it very difficult to prove an advantage for white. You know, I didn't turn on the computer or anything, but I found it very hard to just get some clean advantage for white after g5. Okay, so queen g5, king h8, and now the next move that white makes, I don't understand. I absolutely don't get it. So this is the move I think white should beat himself up over, g4. And in his narrative of what's going on, he's writing that he's continuing the attack on the king. But that doesn't make any sense to me, because I don't see how g4 hurts black. There's also a funny thing here where, you know, it's all of a sudden it's really hard to see what white's going to do. And let's just think about white's problems for a second. Surprisingly, e5 might be annoying, and one reason it might be annoying is when you trade queens, this knight e3 business might plop on down on you. The extra pawn is almost meaningless now. It's not like we can use an extra pawn to pop him open. I mean, maybe that was even like the long-term dream, that he wanted to believe that he had all the time in the world to do something like that. And b4, of course, is on the horizon with things like, and there's also a3, knight b2. There's just so many different things that black is going to be dreaming about in the coming moves. So I'm going to guess you turn the computer on, you might find something, but I'm just going to say for myself, I didn't find anything that was completely satisfying me as a path out of this mess, but definitely not g4. I considered, for example, h6, rook g8, and then something like queen d5, but I wasn't satisfied here either because of knight e3 stuff. Probably first, you know, a bishop move, trade the queens, and then I have to worry about knight e3, and I found it unsatisfying. So let me put it this way. I know g4 is wrong because it feels like you're giving up a key tempo, but I guess I'm going to vote, my intuitive vote then is going to be knight h3, and that you should still be better. It's still going to be a mess, though. I can guarantee it's still going to be a mess. Okay, so here we go. g4, e5. I think it's a good move. It was surprising to me, too. But the point is, if you trade queens, knight e3, it's going to be a hassle. You know? For example, I don't think you can even take this thing. At the very least, you got to wonder about this business. And maybe this is actually genius level because of knight e2 and the knight is trapped. That actually is genius level. So wait a second. If you can trade queens, you want to do it. So let's see if this works. At first I thought it didn't work. because of precisely that, but maybe I missed it. So knight d2, king c2, and we're fine. Let's say he says, you are undeveloped, sir, and what are you going to do about that? Still, you just take and play knight e2. Even here, watch. Knight d2, knight f3, and things didn't go quite so well. But here's the basic point, Kevin. You gotta trade queens here. He's got too much juice for you to be going all the way back home. And what you're guilty of is that you felt that you were attacking and didn't realize that you were the one now actually getting attacked. Okay, I think black has several good moves here. He does this, which looks good. And now I think we gotta say he's better. And all of this just seems madness to me. But at the very least, I think he's the one for choice here, even though this is a mess. I'm going to admit that I went through the last couple moves quickly, too quickly. But again, this position is very frightening here. Queen e5, rook d2, rook c8, and I think, yeah, this is just a good example. I realize I went through the last couple moves too quick, but this is an example where you are in big trouble because of all kinds of grief. I think queen d1 was something you could think about, but it's still not going to solve your troubles, like king g7, for example. So let's read what you wrote, and this very much applies to you. The situation you're about to describe applies very much to the strategy you tried to hold on to with keeping the queens on. You write, bishop a6 question mark. I didn't think it was a mistake when I played it, but the problem is that calculating potential sacrifices for every move he made consumed a lot of my time. Looking back, I should have played queen d1 and kept everything intact. Right. Yeah, of course, these positions are going to be really, really nasty. And watch what happens here. Knight b3, ab, rook c3, check to the miserable king. Check to the miserable king. Got to do something. Check to the miserable king. Bishop takes b3. And, yeah, really interesting position. I guess black is better, but obviously we're still not done yet. h6, very nice move, h6. So the point is, if you take, let's double check this. The knight's got to go somewhere terrible, and then you do this old trick where you run the pawns like that. Okay. So knight h3, bishop c2. I'm not sure I understood bishop c2. I thought, isn't this just totally crushing? Now maybe bishop c2 is also crushing, but rook f3 is like, oh no, everything's fallen down, and these pawns are set up perfectly with the bishop, right, where they're controlling all these squares. King a2, snip. Bishop c4, okay. Note, if rook c2, the terrible b3 happens. Snip. And now black, or white rather, is very close to holding. I think is holding. You wrote, this endgame is probably losing with the bishops of the same color, but he will have to play accurately. Now, maybe there is some way to do it with greater accuracy, but in general, I think it will be very difficult to avoid white sacrificing the bishop for the pawn. Let's roll through this. Really great move, bishop g2. Really, yeah, stunning move. H takes, check, snip. And let's read what you wrote. Technically a drawn position, but this is the first time I encountered such an endgame in an actual game. Somehow, where in the middle I got into the losing sequence, but the 50 move roll saves my pitiful endgame skills. So let me tell a quick story. I was hanging out this summer with some GMs here in St. Louis. We had Ray Robeson and Josh Friedel, and years ago, Josh Friedel had really mastered this thing. And the thing to understand about this endgame is it's not just an endgame where white needs to know some drawing maneuvers, but it's also a situation where if black really knows what he's doing, he can put the squeeze on in an incredible way. And so I had Friedel play some of the other GMs and IMs that we were just hanging out with. It was like late on a Saturday night or something. And Robeson held it comfortably. Other people had troubles, let's put it that way. But it's especially because we were using a 30-second increment that people were able to be or have better chances to hold it. And what you're going to see here is that Kevin's opponent doesn't quite know what to do. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because learning how to play with the rook and the bishops and the dirty tricks that you have to do in order to win, it takes some study, right? And I actually need to refresh my own understanding of that. And let me just say before we go, we're not going to leave the broadcast, but before we go to the next game, that the 7th ranked defense is kind of what black should be white should be looking for. You can see white's losing some time here, losing a lot of time, and that's not the way it's going to go. Right? Oh, this is no bueno here. It's loads of lost time. Oh. Okay, I don't want to run through the whole 50 moves. Both, I'm sure, were in big time pressure. Let's move on to the famous Matt Tripodi, and I feel like this game is a companion game to Tim's game from earlier, where Tim had that great sacrifice on f5. PH1256, could I explain the G3's English? That's definitely something I could do at some point. I feel like right now I spent so much time on the earlier games, I'm worried that I'm not going to get to the later games. So I think I'm going to do that at a later point. And okay, let's get into this game. Like I said, this game, companion game to Tim's game, in the sense that Matt is playing a player, an FM, rated around 2300, and Matt is like 200 points below, and definitely intimidated. This has been played at a famous tournament. It's called the Under 2400, that's 2400 FIDE Marshall Chess Club tournament, and he's playing Boris Privman, who I haven't played, but I know about. And right away, Boris plays this opening, and I'm kind of shocked that it's playable. Let me put it that way. I'm shocked that you can do this. It's actually very interesting to me that you can do this. Now, before I get into the idiosyncrasies of this, one thing I've noticed about 2300s is they often have, especially the older guys, they often have some idiosyncratic opening that's a little bit weird, and they kind of have some experience with it, so they'll have certain tricks up their sleeves with it, but at the end of the day it's just kind of a weird thing. Now, this E5, first of all, I want to commend him in just being like, oh, black taught me something, because I didn't really think this was playable, but I spent some time looking at it, and I guess it is playable. And the main reason I just thought intuitively it wasn't playable is that I thought that this would be a nice position for white, but in fact it turns out not to be so easy. Now, before we get into it, let me just say the reason I thought it wasn't that strong is its companion position is this one, and this one is definitely playable for black. Very simple idea. Maybe I can show you. If white makes the two natural moves, he's actually close to lost. Knight f3, f6 exclam, the knight is now dead. Knight c6, c6, the other knight is dead. But two dead knights. Black plays king c7 whenever he or she likes, and is better. And the point is, obviously white had better moves than knight c3 and knight f3, but this pawn is misplaced. So it surprised me when black could play this endgame without any kind of drawback. I looked at a lot of things actually here, and I couldn't find anything mildly convincing. The structure is basically the structure black is aiming for is essentially very similar to what I just showed. Some kind of combination of f6, c6, and put the king here. And black can definitely play it for a win because so many players will play knight f3, which I'm going to call a mistake because now the knight is done after f6. So that's the first interesting thing that I feel like I learned. Let's call it opening theory from this game, that you could do that. Now the next thing that we get from the notes is that Matt foresaw that a lot of what black was going to do, and this creates a practical advantage for Matt, and we're going to see that in the position he gets. So when you play an idiosyncratic opening, so your opponents are going to, and you're in the database, they're going to look you up and they're going to try to lie in wait for you. So here we go, knight f3, and now the next move that I'm definitely going to call idiosyncratic, which is e takes d4. And I don't like it. I think it's bad chess to give up your central pawn like that. And the question though is, that's really interesting is that what advantage, oh my god, I'm getting it. What advantage does black get by playing d6, e5? Now normally, right, what people would do is play either knight f6 here or knight d7 followed by e5 with, let's call it, a more standard Philidor position. So yeah, what advantage do you get? And I guess if you're going to take, there's some narrative about the fact that you haven't committed the knight to d7, for example. And so maybe, say, on queen d4, you're going to play knight c6 and get this kind of position. You know, I guess that's the intention. And Matt writes about this in his notes with some kind of position like this, where, gotta say, it's a little tricky to put the knight on c3 because of that pawn on c6 dominating the knight. Okay, let's look at the game. Knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, and here's a move which Matt had clearly prepared, g3. And I'm going to say I don't like it because it's not clear that the bishop belongs there, and you're making an additional pawn move. I'm the tempo fiend, it's well known. Let's just honor, though, this g3 idea, which is that if you play bishop e2, which is what I guess I want you to do, the bishop will probably have to get out of the way anyway for the rook when it comes to e1. And on g3, the hope is that on bishop g2, you're also strengthening your look down the board. So, apparently, Matt knew about d5 in advance, which is an attempt to, of course, punish white for making an additional pawn move. So here we go. The drama begins. e5, knight g4, bishop g2, and here's a very, this is something actually I think is important to think about with preparing for a higher rated player and the kind of things to be aware of psychologically. So Matt had looked at this thing beforehand and had looked at the line with knight e5. And let's just look at the variation he posted here. Here, and definitely some, a nice position after knight takes d5. But you got to worry maybe about that move, right? Okay, still, that's a different story. I think white is a little bit better in that position, though. And instead, what happens is your opponent plays some move like that, where you say to yourself, "Holy moly, I didn't think about that move." And let's talk first about, let's call it suspicions. When your opponent plays some move, especially like you've already looked in the database and you have maybe turned on your computer, but your computer didn't say c5 or you don't remember c5, you need to get your suspicions up that black is doing something incorrect. Okay? And in this game in particular, white misses a big opportunity that has to do with trusting your opponent. Okay? And this is something that's very common when people are playing higher rated players, is when they make a funky move, you trust that they aren't just doing something ridiculous. And this happens to everybody. A lot of times, for example, when I or other people are playing blitz and some funny move is made, you just bust it out. The kind of, you trust the guy that he didn't blunder a piece, when oftentimes they in fact did blunder a piece. Calixte USA, it was fun playing yesterday. Yeah, we have this other show, or today it was actually, this show where we're streaming Play the People here at the club, and we're going to do it again tomorrow at 3 Central, 4 Eastern for like an hour and a half. So you want to play me a blitz game, we can play tomorrow. Anyways, let's go back to this. Imagine Matt's thinking about this guy and he's like, oh, knight b5 looks pretty tempting, but I'm worried that the guy has some kind of trick. Well, this guy's hanging, so you got to move it. And I think the only thing you have to see in this position is that there's no way to ever win your knight, because of this dirty trick. I think that's the only thing you have to see, because otherwise, this is just a beauty. And something I want to stress here is that Matt writes that he kind of saw this position but didn't see that there was some kind of business with like knight e7 and knight d6. And let me stress, you do not need to see knight c7, knight e7, and knight d6. Even if you did not have that move, you should still do this, because those knights aren't going anywhere. Yeah, this is just a brilliant position for white. And the real bummer about this knight d6 is when we get here, we can threaten to take and undermine this dog over here, this errant animal on our side of the board. Okay, so here we go. Knight f3, d4, and black, I think correctly, plays f6. And let's just pretend this is all kind of sort of forced. Queen e2, queen e7. Now, here's a really important, interesting moment. White took, and I think Boris played a really terrible move here. Yeah. So, by the way, actually, we're starting what I'm going to consider the next section here of our games today. The first 3 were attacking games, and the next, what do we got? 3 games are going to be end games, right? And one thing I want you guys to just note when you look at these end games is that, at least to my eyes, the quality of play goes down dramatically. And what I mean by that takes e7. And honestly, that move makes me want to scream. You know, that's a terrible move. Of course he should take with the king. This bishop is kind of looking to at least try to dominate the knight, and if the knight can't move, the bishop can't move. And of course the king wants to come out. He wants to let the rooks slide over. So you're seeing here a 2300 make a pretty basic mistake, and that's why when you talk to GMs and they're at some open tournament or whatever, they're often talking about how they're just hoping to crush their opponents in the end game. They're always just trying to go to the end game and wreck them. It's a very simple strategy. Now, I'm sure Boris had a reason for playing bishop e7, and I'm going to guess he had some notion that he was worried about bishop d6 later. I don't think there's any way that's actually going to work out for white, but I'm just telling you, I think that's what he was concerned about. Okay, so here we go. Bishop e7, knight e5. Good move. Very good move, opening the bishop. So, with that mistake, Matt, you are now again on top, right? You're definitely better. You give black's next move an exclam. Maybe it is an exclam move, but it certainly doesn't solve black's problems here. So knight c6, snip, knight e7, king e7. Good. Let's talk about why white is better. I'm going to say he's up a tempo because it's his move. He's up another tempo because this bishop isn't developed. And arguably he's up a third tempo because the pawn on b7 is going to need to be babysat before the bishop on c8 moves. I'm not counting king e7 right here as a developing move because it seems clear that the guy's going to have to scooch. He can't hang out on the e-file. Well, but we might give him a little bit because, you know, you could argue that he's going to be developed in some sense over here. In addition to all that, the pawn on f4 isn't necessarily black's friend because he doesn't really want to take it anytime soon to activate this rook. And that'll give us hopes of playing some kind of take ourselves. Okay. White's next move is a natural move that's a mistake that at first glance you have to think about it for a second as to understand why it's a mistake, but it's definitely a mistake, and Matt notes it in his notes with king d2. And there's two main reasons this is a mistake, but I'm going to say the most, well, they're both important. One, as Matt notes, we might want to play b4 to undermine this pawn. Two, the rook is engaged and this guy's getting ready to come in himself. And three, and maybe this is the most important, this bishop can't move because when we take this guy, there is no counter onto our pawn. That said, I still like white's position here. I don't think this throws away the advantage. All right, bishop d7 and rook ae1. I'm going to say I don't like this move, rook ae1. Let me try to explain. Uh-oh, sound is gone. That's terrible. Whew! Hold on, sound is gone. Is my sound back? Sound is back. Okay. Don't worry. Okay, let me try to set it back to the other thing I had before. That was really weird with the audio. Okay. I'm going to be watching. Tell me if it goes. That was no noise now. Much better. Okay, good. All right, so let me go back. By the way, I have to say, I'm not a sports fan, really at all, but I've gotten hooked on Oh man, I've gotten hooked on Pulisic playing for Chelsea, and they're 1-1. Chelsea against Man United. Here we go. This is how much I love you people. I am here with you instead of watching the game. If anyone gets a big goal, if Pulisic score, just tell me. We'll pause. We'll pause for a second. All right, let me come back to Rook A1. Why is this a mistake? Well, it's not clear that the rook wants to go to E1, whereas it is clear that the king wants to go to D6. That's the first thing. The second thing is a little bit more tactical, and I didn't turn on the computer or anything, but the drama for black here is, can white get away with the following maneuver? Snip, rook here and here, and the point is, if you take, you've got to worry about losing your rook, right? I clicked something and the noise came back, other than background noise. Please switch back to the other mode without noise. Uh-oh. There's some background noise here in the dungeon today, and it's kind of annoying me. It's kind of like this really thing going on. So I think I switched it to what I had before. Let me just check that. So yeah, it should be fine. At least it's, I don't know if it's fine, but it's what I had before. This mode is, the other is softer but without noise. Okay, let's try it. Let's try it. Okay, so maybe this one is better. So I just changed it. Maybe someone can give me an update as to whether this is any better. Much better. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I'll be back next week doing my normal Wednesday show, and hopefully the specs or whatever will be a little better. You know, we do the broadcasts here. I'm using like their setup, and they've got it all like dialed in onto a much more professional system than, you know, my computer or whatnot. And that's what we'll be using tomorrow for the Play the People stream. So what was I at? Bishop b3. This seems real dangerous to me, where you're creating some drama for black. I don't think, unless black has something special here, I don't think you take on b2. You know, maybe black has some compensation here, but this does look like advantage to white to me. Yeah. Okay. So, rook at e1, king d6, and this is a move that I don't like, b3. Let's talk about it. Matt writes, I couldn't find any moves. The pawn break c2, c3 never entered my mind. I didn't want to open any more files for his rooks to help him give him a passed pawn. All the while attacking the head of his pawn chain, going against the teachings of Nimzovich. Does his guideline apply? Question mark. Am I overly paranoid? Question mark. I considered a funny looking move, rook hg1, defending the bishop and preparing rook e4. Okay. Now, the thing you should beat yourself up about with b3 is that really it looks like a loss. It looks like loss of time more than anything else. But you're right. I feel your pain. You came to a moment here and you said to yourself, I don't know what to do. And like we saw with Tim's opponent in game one, of course, it's something that all players can suffer from, not finding a plan. And let's talk about why c3 is a good move for a second. Yes, we're doing some stuff like attacking the head of the pawn chain. But in general, yeah, it's not something in general I think we want to necessarily do with c3. But c3 relates actually a little bit to the mistake of rook a e1. Namely that there's two options that black has here. He either takes us or he lets us take, right? If he lets us take and he gets the isolated pawn, that isolated passed pawn is really not going anywhere because boom, our king is perfectly situated, blockading the thing. And really that pawn will just be a victim to the white king. If he takes, however, then we can start giving his king more of the business. And that was one of the reasons that rook a e1 wasn't the greatest thing. on the last move. Let's call it a superficial move. And let's also add that if for whatever reason we didn't like bishop b7, then we could consider c3 here, right? And if takes, now we can give him the business with both our rooks in the center. White is better. And it's this move b3 where I feel like you're losing time and you are not sensing the the need to improve your position, right? And it's from this moment where things begin to slide for you, my sense. Okay. Rook b8, maybe at a more active move. Gf, and you write question mark. I'm not sure it was that bad, but your follow-up is definitely wrong. So let's read what you wrote. I saw the possibility of getting active with rook e5, which turned out to be a farce, and I was left with a shattered kingside. It was very difficult psychologically to do nothing and shuffle on the first rank. My only other idea was to play bishop f3 and g4. I don't like that one. To close the kingside. But this also seemed weak, but possibly a better practical try. I was getting low on time. Okay, so look, one of the things that we've talked about a lot on the show, and that occurs again and again, is that we need to be laser focused in the endgame on activity, right? And the thing, you got burned twice actually on the e-file, let's say. The first was on rook ae1, you thought you were going to be able to do something there. And now you're dreaming that rook e5, that you're going to be able to do something there as well, which turns out to be difficult to actually get going. So, but I want to say GF in itself, I don't think is a completely terrible move. And after b6, you should say to yourself, I still have time here, time to do things. And I think a totally reasonable plan here where you can play for an advantage is bishop e4. And a sample variation might go something like rook f8, rook g1, rook f4, and f3. And I feel like you have control over the only open file. And so I'd rather be white here. And of course, you're touching the h7 pawn. But more importantly, right, we're going to start the business on the squares like g7. So, you know, it's still complicated, but I like your position here. Yeah. All right, let's look at what happened. b6, rook e5, rook dg8, check to the miserable king, rook g5. Now you write, maybe I'm drifting now. And I think you are drifting a little bit, but it's not over yet. h6, rook g3. Honestly, you're still fine. You're still fine. Rook f8. Here's some weird stuff that's going to happen now. And I'm sure a lot of it was time pressure. Again, the move I like is bishop e4 and f3. And without thinking of it, I just, in my mind, said that that would be posting up, you know, like in a basketball play. You're posting up on e4. So instead, rook e4, rook h7. I wonder if that's actually necessary, but okay. Bishop e4, and now f5. Again, play f3. You can do it now or after like a move. You could also play, you know, rook g6 or something, rook f4, f3. And notice on this, we kind of don't even want the e file. We want to be back here. You are the master of the g file, right? Okay. So bishop f5, bishop d5. You're right, this is inconsistent. I was planning on playing f3, but hated to put more pawns on light squares. Okay. So now the guy is going to outplay you in the next couple moves. And now he's better. And arguably now you're in trouble. And let's just reflect a little bit on what's going on. Now, he has the more active rook, the more active bishop, the more active king, and partly because he's more active, this pawn, which is on the opposite color of this bishop, is doing great work on the dark squares. And when he gets the initiative, your king is really going to be in trouble. So I think already here, you're in big trouble, and the game falls apart immediately. Is there any way out? I don't actually see it anymore. So already, like, I guess already here, yeah, you're already deep in the business here. Yeah, bishop a6, bishop g4. And I think you're lost, and it's not, remember, it's not just the pawn, it's the fact that your pieces are so much less active. This doesn't make any sense to me. And then we resign. Let's read your lesson. I think the lesson from this game is I should have more confidence and not be so motivated by fear. For example, not going for the c3 break. Very true. And I think the activity in the endgame business should also stick with you. Yeah. And I think also what you saw here, Matt, is you're playing somebody who I can tell you fear, but who also made some key mistakes. And if he were on here in this show, I would be berating him about king e7. You know, not to be mean, but to be like, listen, dude, this is like, if you can fix this in your chess, like if you made it to 2300 making moves like king takes e7, oh man, you're ready for 2500. Easy now, just fix that one, right? Okay, let's move on to the next one. We got the famous Paul in New Jersey, who's been on the show quite a bit. And he writes, I hate it when players play bishop c4 on move 3 to take me out of the dragon. No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is not one of your worries here with bishop c4. Bishop c4 is, for the most part, a bad move. Knight c6, c3. I think he should play d4 and transpose back into a dragon. That's his best move. c3, knight f6, d3. And here you make a mistake where your opponent is going to punish you for the rest of the game, honestly, for this mistake. Let's take a look. Bishop g4, and now, boom, I'm sure you missed queen b3. This happens to all of us, so you shouldn't feel that bad. And the truth is, maybe you get a chance later. But I don't think you should beat yourself up as much as you did, because you are suffering now from this point. You got to hang some stuff. And this next phase of the game, I don't feel like White played it as accurately as he could have. It was a real bummer here that you couldn't take with the king because of knight e5. We get this position. Okay. Are you lost here? Yes. And let's talk about why. The reason that it's so terrible for you here is not just that you're down a pawn, not just that this guy's out of play, but this e7 pawn is also going to become a weakness, right? How do you get out without him snipping you? So I think you are totally toast here, but you do fight your way back in. So let's look. It's another way of putting it. You know, yes, you fight your way back in, but your opponent was actually very complacent here in the next several moves here. Knight b5 makes no sense to me. Now he's going to have the same problem that Matt's opponent had last game, which was defending this pawn. He should play something like, I don't know, castles or bishop f4. Put a rook on e1 ASAP. Castles. Knight b7, okay. Knight d6, very good. He should be playing bishop f4 right now. a3, rook f8, bishop f4, knight e5. Okay, so your opponent has played inaccurately here. And even with that, you are, I think, in a lost position. And it's unfair. Chess can often be unfair, right? You've made just one mistake, and your opponent has really played pretty uninspired. And nevertheless, you are, I guess, either lost or close to lost. And the reason is that when he challenges you on the e-file, the pawn endgame is so good for him that you can't get out of it. Right? Or, excuse me, let me put that clear. The pawn endgame is always so good for him that you have to let him have the e-file. And if he has the e-file plus the extra pawn, that to me is the two advantages, right? So simple endgame theory. In order to declare a position winning, we need to say that you have two advantages, and that's what it looks like White's getting to. Rook a e8. Maybe we could do something more fancy, but you know. In fact, as a practical measure, maybe d takes e5 here was a better shot. You're still lost there, but at least the position gets a little funky, and maybe you can bring the king to d6. King f1, king g7, and now White definitely screws it up here and plays f4. For sure, the guy should play rook e1. For sure. And this is, I assume, just totally lost. But maybe I need to check myself, actually. I better check myself here. Takes king here. Right. You got to stop king e5. I did look at this, actually. King f5, g3. Let's just look at this for a second. It might seem for a moment that we're going to survive this. But the problem is that b4 and d4 are going to come very quickly. In fact, maybe even we might even let you take on h2. I did not calculate this out in any incredible depth, but I do think this is toast. Let me just try. b4, let's just say king h2, snip, you got to snip this way, bam, let's just say you take, bam, over, right? Okay, so let's go back to the game. f4, though, definitely a mistake. And here, I guess you're guilty of playing a natural move without looking deeper at what's going on. In the game, you played rook e3. And what this allows White to do is consolidate his position with rook d1. And then the bummer now is he's going to play king f2. And we are not going to be able to keep him from kicking us out, right? Kicking us out from paradise. So, what should we do? Let's go back. Can't we just play rook f5? Looks pretty good to me. And the position actually just seems fully equal. Where, you know, in a practical game, you're going to have chances to win. Where, you know, maybe I just saw a way for White to press the advantage, but it's going to be pretty tricky. This is obviously the problem. And even this, it'll look scary. Like, this isn't going to save him, right? Because then he's blocking his own rook. And if he goes this way, then we have ready-made counterplay with rook d4. Right? We're okay. We could have played king f8 as well if we needed to. Now, after rook f5, maybe White can still play for an advantage with, I kind of doubt this, but let's give it a try. g3, g5, king f2, intending king f3, holding the pawn, takes g4. No, I'm going to say this isn't good enough, though. Rook e5. What do you want? What do you want from me? What do you want? No. And rook e1, I'm intending rook e3. I play f6, and I'm fine. You can't even do anything to me. Okay. So, right. I think rook f5, you are now fully in the business. And, yeah, so rook e3. Big chance missed. And the way this guy is played, he deserves to not win this game at this point. Rook d1, and I don't see any way for you to draw here. It's a similar thing as before. The guy can now bully you on the e-file. And you offer to draw on king f6? Yeah. But right, it's over. King f3. Okay, this is probably fine. I was thinking about rook e1. I was also kind of astonished that the guy didn't play h3 here. And now d4, another funny move. Right, let's just pause for a second. Why wouldn't you play h3, g4, kick the black king out, and then if you wanted to do d4, do d4? I don't like d4, and there's very simple reasons. You could have just taken this thing now, and then at the very least, you know, you're in. You will at the very least get a little bit of play here. You're the one with the active rook. No, he's blown it. He's blown it really, really bad here. And now there's no way for him even to kick you anymore because you can kick him first and then start going to talk to his pawns like so, right? Yeah, we're going to talk to him here. Maybe rook c3 too. And yeah, I don't think actually rook c3 is probably more accurate. And you are simply not going to lose this game. You might win. Honestly, you might win this game now because if your king finds a way into his position. Actually, yeah, if your king finds a way in, you know, he's got trouble. In fact, look at this move. Bam! Now I think we've got pressure. Okay, so in the way it happened, after d4, you played rook e4, and he was able to be a jerk and just consolidate again. And unfortunately, play for that. And I guess we're lost. And notice the king on f5, whenever white figures it out, he's going to play h3 and g4. You went back voluntarily. b5 was maybe not best, but okay. Fully passive now. Fully passive. And this is the nightmare for black. By the way, the last phase of the game from white, he played that well. I like the way he played that. That was well done. Once you became passive, it was easy for the guy. Okay. All right. Vishnu is writing. Paul in New Jersey says, "Am I famous or infamous?" You are famous, Paul. And Vishnu writes, "I have a similar problem against an early bishop c4, especially with f4. What is it? A Grand Prix?" It can evolve into a Grand Prix, and the Grand Prix itself can be dangerous. But bishop c4, the problem is you're setting yourself up for all kinds of a6s and b5s. So I think as a Najdorf player, you should play knight f6 first. And let's say they play knight c3. Well, then we play a6. And we've got, or excuse me, you said you're a dragon player. This is also fine. And we're getting ready for b5 and to snaggle his bishop and to make it bad. And you might have to play e6. And that might be an example for you of being out of your natural comfort zone with your pawn structure. We talked a lot about that in Nicholas's game with the Cotley system. But you know, the pawns are there just to help your pieces and to make his worse. And e6 destroys this bishop. For example, if he wants to spend 1,000 tempi making that bishop kind of beautiful looking, well, then we're just going to end it. We're going to end the knight streams on c3 as well. And here you just have a very nice Sicilian position. The Grand Prix is an interesting thing in itself, though I would say that if white wants a Grand Prix, he should start with knight c3. And then think about, okay, I'll put the Grand Prix quickly in perspective. You play f4, knight f3, you try to rid yourself of that bishop on f1, and then you castle. When I say rid yourself, is you play either bishop c4, bishop b5, try to trade the thing off, try to get the dream of Federico the f-pawn, right? And I'm sure we're going to have another chance to talk about that in a different show. All right, so let's head on to the famous Vishnu. Okay. Although d6 is an unambitious dragon move. Well, it's funny you say that. We're going to get an accelerated dragon now in Vishnu's game. And let's talk about that. Okay, so I would say, first of all, d6 is a very ambitious dragon move. It's the traditional dragon. Vishnu is playing the hyper-ambitious dragon, which is the accelerated, where we're going to leave our pawn on d7 for a little bit to leave it uncommitted. Okay, bishop c4. Now, here's the thing. There's all kinds of moves that black can do here. Let me mention 3. There's the move that Vishnu played, and we're going to look at that. There is the more conventional castles, bishop b3, d6. This is the famous sack mate position that Bobby made famous. And also castles, bishop b3. By the way, bishop b3 needs to be done because we're threatening knight e4 and d5. Bishop b3 and a5 is also another interesting move. I think actually, especially where Vishnu is at, a5 is a very good practical move because you can study it, and it's a very interesting position where, especially if you turn on the engine, there's all kinds of funny things you can learn that are kind of like secrets in a practical game. But that's also true a little bit of what happened in your game. Though I have to admit, I like White's position more here if he knows what he's doing. So let's talk about queen a5. By the way, let me just say, the traditional Yugoslav attack against this situation, let's call it the situation, the conventional dragon, I think is on rough times. And there's a very simple reason for these rough times. And I think it's easy to understand, so I'm just going to put it out there. We're threatening knight g4, so typical theory is going to go something like f3, bishop d7, queen d2, rook c8, castles, knight e5, h4. And the move that is surprising, it's been around pre-computer, but it's surprising, is h5. And this position would be another great position for Vishnu to play. I believe Magnus and a lot of other strong GMs have had this position as black. And the simple point is that g4 doesn't work. It seems like it should, right? It seems like g4 should work in this position, but it simply doesn't. And because it doesn't work, it means that black has beautiful play, very interesting play too. By the way, in this position, we get the standard Sicilian dragon plan of someday dumping a knight on c4. And we're going to come back to that plan in Vishnu's game. It's definitely something that he should be aware of. I'm sure he is, but we're going to talk about it. So back to this position. The point of queen a5 is to be really annoying, okay? To play queen a5. And White generally wants to castle long and mate you. However, queen a5 is basically going to take almost a full tempo out and say, look, I'm threatening knight e4, and therefore I want you to go over there. I take it back. It's not a full tempo out. It's just unclear that the queen wants to go to a5, right? And I think it's very dangerous if White knows what he's doing. Let's play a move. Let's say that's correct. Let's say that's correct. And let's say this is White's big moment here. I think a humorous thing that happens, and I'm sure that if Vishnu plays this position often, he will get this mistake quite a bit, is White plays f3. And this is actually a great example of what we were talking about earlier in Nicholas's game, and I believe we had an example in, it was a recent game, it was Paul's game, I'm not sure. In any case, it is the move that the hand is accustomed to making, f3, okay? And why? Because so many kids now, and other players as well, are learning this simple opening repertoire against the Sicilian, which is basically to play the English attack against everything, right? What is the English attack? You play f3 to dominate the knight, and then you play g4, g5 to kick the thing. However, right? However, it's not at all clear in this position that we need to play g4, for example. And we need to start thinking, White does, about how he intends to create some drama. And if he thinks about it for a little bit and plays h3, which Vishnu notes is the more standard move, this is a very dangerous position because f4 is going to come, and with f4, all the dreams of Federico are going to be there. e5 and f5, freeing at some point freeing the rook and the bishop onto the king. And of course, actually I did a lecture, was it last night, on a totally different game, but in this structure, where part of the problem is it's difficult for the extra black center pawn, the pawn on e7, to participate in the central fight, because if you play e6, which you might want to at some point, then the d6 square is a little bit loose. At some point, black might want to do it anyway. That was actually the point of the lecture last night. You can find that on YouTube, by the way. If you go to the St. Louis Chess Club YouTube page, you can find that game, that lecture, as well as several other lectures that I've done and other people have done here at the club. Okay, f3, let's say bishop d7 is okay, queen d2, and now I do not like what Vishnu does here. I feel like his next move is also he's playing like an idea that doesn't belong to this current situation. He plays snip, snip, and then bishop c6, and what I don't like about it is it's not clear to me that the bishop belongs on c6. In particular, it's hitting this rock now. So we've got two pieces that are getting smushed by the f3 pawn. Now, I don't think he's necessarily worse yet or anything. I just don't like it. So the plan that I think is much more ambitious for White would be to play one of the rooks to c8. Let's say this one. And then the other one might be better. I don't know. Let's just say for a second one of those rooks and then knight e5. You could even play, I think, knight e5 first, because f4 is no bueno because of knight g4. Okay, and this is the same idea that we had in the other position, which is to land a knight on c4. Very typical Sicilian dragon idea. You steal the bishops and you start working the c-file, right? In Fischer style, even though Fischer is playing the Najdorf, it's the same idea here. You want to play knight c4, and the problem that White needs to understand is if you do not mate black, you do not blame me, black, he will nail you on the c-file, and you have one center pawn less. Okay. Sure, Paul. Happy you're here. All right. Let's go further. So knight d4, bishop c6, and right, knight d7, you write is the correct move. By the way, I think a really good person whose games you can look at and who wrote a book on the subject for the Accelerated Dragon is Eugene Perelstein. Perelstein's played some really nice games, especially games with knight d7, particularly against the Maroczy, for example. But he's had a lot of other positions that are kind of similar like this, where we're going to trade the dark square bishop and maybe even at knight d5 trade this bishop here for the knight to have a knight versus bishop endgame, which actually might be pretty interesting for us. Okay, so let's look. Rook fe8, knight d7, queen d4, and it's real interesting actually that queen e5 was not played here. I'm not sure I understand why not. Yeah, queen e5. In general, let's put it as in terms of an idea of the opening here. You are interested in trading because long term you have more pawns in the center and this guy is not working. And in particular, this king is now out. That's another feature. But in terms of just the general opening idea is white starts with more activity, more development. As the game wanes, black's power goes up. That's the theme of really all of the Sicilians, why they're such a dynamic, interesting opening. Black literally starts down several tempi, but if the game continues to drag on in the late middle game, as we're here, we have good chances. This move is really dangerous though, because now it's like we're giving white hope that his bishop on b3 and the queen on d4 are doing something, right? f4, okay. Here, Vishnu goes on a tirade against his messy opponent. I hate those people. Not fixing their pieces, not centralizing them. I'm always a jerk too. I'm like, adjust, fix your messy pieces. Okay, so f4, knight c5, and I honestly, you give knight c5 a question mark, but I think you're in a little bit of trouble here. Yeah, you're in a little bit of trouble. And the simple reason is that the bishop on b3 is talking to you. All right, I assume you're playing one of these kids that plays really fast. And he only thinks for 3 or 4 minutes on this move, which I think needs more time. And he goes ahead and goes for it with bishop f7. One thing I want to stress is that the position after f5 also looks dangerous to me. Yeah, it's a dangerous position. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but the f file is going to be a thing in not too distant future. On the other hand, when I look at your position, it's a little bit hard to see what it is that you're supposed to do. Maybe knight f6 or something. All right, here we go. Knight c5. He plays bishop f7, king f7, and immediately cashes in with b4. And you write f5, and I like it a lot. Though here, to play this move, f5, I think the kid really would have to calculate some. In particular, there's questions, what did I have here, of, like, let's say knight d7, okay? So we're hoping to bring this guy back. We're hoping to bring this guy back. White has to calculate something like snip. He has to calculate both king g8 and the more natural king g6. And then, he's got to worry about the rook f3s of the world and the rook d3s of the world. But he's got to figure it out before he does it, because your knight is potentially coming back, your queen is coming back, so you would have to at least think for a while in order to play this position. Okay, so he cashes in. You say, all right, let's trade some stuff off. And here, a horrendous move. This is one of the worst I've seen. Like I said, we're going to see some bad endgame play, and your opponent really furnishes us with it here. And it's not technically an endgame, but part of the endgame is when do you go into it. And definitely this is not when you do it here. This is not when you do it. All he has to do is move the queen back somewhere. You gave this variation, queen d2. d3 seems fine too. And you said this was only a little bit better for white. And I would say, oh, I don't know. This looks like high drama over here to me. Really bad news. Jesse doesn't like it. I feel like you're gonna get mated over there. Yeah, really bad. And actually, this is a good. I'm sure there's more than one move besides knight d5, but it's a good example of talking about how, in the late middle game, with the heavies on, the person with the better king is, a person with a better king is always better, or it's it's an advantage to have the better king. But here with the heavies on, man oh man, especially without that black queen able to come back and help in any easy way, it seems to me like black's in really bad shape. Okay, so here it is, blunder. I'm going to call that a blunder. Because now, well, I like your position quite a bit, Vishnu. Yeah, I like it a lot. And he plays f5. That's not right. Absolutely not right. He's thinking he's still on the attack or something? The attack is over, my friend. And now he's got to start worrying about the Fischer endgame with this bishop dominating the knight. And what is he doing? He's creating with f5 more pawn islands for you to talk to. So, Vishnu, let's break it down in your dream to become 2000 or 2200, whatever it is your dream is. That dream is paved with the carcasses of these kids who can't play the endgame, right? They have no idea what they're doing here. Your move is natural enough. And what did he do? He fixed your king. So now, really, just about all your pieces are better than his pieces. King G1. And the next move is a pretty instructive thing. I guess you talk about how it's calculation here, and to a certain extent that's true. But I guess what I want to turn you on to here is that, in a way, it's just very basic thinking about the activity of the pieces. So this king wants to improve. It's already better than this guy. And so the easy plan you give, I think I'm going to show you more than one, but the easy one you give, I don't think that requires calculation, right? Because this is just a monster. It's just a monster when you land on that square. It's so much better than your opponent. And this position, I think you have another move too. I think you wrote in your notes b5. Also looks good. What are you doing? You're going to start pushing your pawns, and you're saying that the knight is no good and that the pawns are weak, and that that in the endgame, we're just going to say a basic Smyslov thing here, is that with an open board and passed pawns running on the open board, like we're probably going to get here, the bishop will be better than the knight. Now, maybe you could say with calculation here, is that with rook d4, is that it looks like an active move, but that in fact he can ignore you, right? And that's what happens. Good move. Okay, the kid, he hasn't played any good moves this game, and I'm going to say good move. He ignores the rook, and your rook actually isn't doing anything. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh no. Now his pieces are going to get organized, and he can at least create some drama. That was a weird move. Something like rook e3. Is that what you wrote that he should do? Yeah, rook e3. Sure, it's very natural. It seems like the intention, too, of his last move, rook d e1, where he's going to try to start giving you the business over there on the king side. And at the very least, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm scared for you, buddy, over there with rook e3. Let's say h5, check to the miserable king. Now, this honestly, this scares me. This just scares me. I'm worried like some accident is going to happen. Yeah, I'm worried about an accident here. Okay, but clearly that's what he should have done. Rook f5, e5. Kind of strange. And yeah, let's go through the variation you gave here. So rook e4, knight e5, 4, king, knight, bishop. And let's read what you write. With a pair of rooks gone, this is probably a safer way to play. And moreover, black's got white's central pawn for a c pawn, which has managed to create a passed e pawn. Now, well, let me fight it a little bit. I think you're right that this is a better position, but it's not about the e-pawn. It's that your position has opened and your king is now the monster that he wanted to be, right? And this is the kind of position that the bishop is striving for all along in these positions, right? And this is officially the Fischer endgame. And just to put it out there, the ideal of the Fischer endgame is to say that it's like a marriage, a good marriage. We've had bad, everybody's seen a bad marriage, but in a good marriage, you got one person does one kind of thing well. Maybe your wife is good at socializing and keeps some friends around that are cool, and the other person does other things, maybe makes some money, maybe takes care of the kids, right? The problem with the bishop all on its own, it only covers one color. But you can see already, let's look at this beast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Holy moly. So what do I got? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Holy smokes. The knight is a maximum of 8. That's the most a knight will ever get. And you're already at 12. So the point is that the rook will help the bishop by covering the squares that the bishop can't see. In this case, the dark squares, right? And yeah, that's what we're looking for. DZ writes about Dvoretsky. I think Dvoretsky's fine, but he's not going to teach you about this kind of position. This is a position where Dvoretsky is going to be talking about algorithms. How do you, what's the algorithm to win X position? This is talking about the principles of endgame play, which are really about activity. And the Fischer endgame is its own special beast. But once you understand that thing I just said about the rook covering the squares of the bishop doesn't, then you'd be like, oh, right, this is a monster position. Okay, let's go on. Rook f3. You write rook ef1 looked like it offered better chances. It certainly looks better than rook f3. So here we go. Some weird stuff happens now. And of course it's scary. And he plays knight e2. He should be going for perpetual, as you noted, with like check to the miserable king over here. Something like that. All right, so knight e2. That poor knight. Rook d2. Rook e3. Knight f4. King h6. Check. And yeah, this is one of the dreams of the bishop, honestly, is that this square is totally nailed down. So you just needed to play king h8. And it looks maybe kind of scary, but man, this beast is running. And like Smyslov said, once the pawns start running, buddy, the bishop is so much stronger than the knight. All right. Both sides are going to make some mistakes here. And now this doesn't make any sense. And maybe one move you should beat yourself up over here, Vishnu, is that you should snip that dog right away. Right? Bam! Because what you should just instantly see is his initiative is gone and you are running the c-pawn. And it's over. It is absolutely over. And notice that, like what I was talking about with the Fischer endgame, the rook and bishop combo against the two rooks, a key feature of it is you really want to be able to keep the rook on so that they complement each other, whereas, and this is really important, the white's two rooks are not complementing each other. Okay, so king h5. I don't quite understand what's going on. Rook h3, nice. And now I guess he's totally lost. Yeah, this has got to be over. It's running. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful at the end. Time to resign. So our dream is here at the show that Vishnu gets his rating up and cracks through the next barrier. He has been working on it. Vishnu, like me, has some kids at home, so I know it's hard. Me and Vishnu working together. Doesn't matter, in a certain sense at this show, we have people of different rating plateaus, let's say. Like I'm at a rating plateau of around 2,500. I haven't moved in a long time, but I'm trying. And it's hard because what happens is you hit a plateau, and it could be 1,600, it could be 1,800, it could be 2,000. And all of a sudden, it becomes really hard to move, really hard to make it to the next step. And the only time I was able to move that needle was in studying my own games. And that's, I guess, why I'm so dogmatic on this point, for people to analyze your own games. All right. We got another tale of improvement. We're talking about different, somebody asked earlier, what is the target demographic? And Ricker here started off on the show and he was just dropping pieces. I'm talking dropping pieces. And, I like to say that there's 3 dimensions to the game: the material, time, and quality of position. And material, in a way, is the easiest to understand, but it's also something that people have to first master, right? People have to learn to, at the beginning of their chess lives, to not give away their stuff. And it's hard to learn. It might seem simple, but it's hard to learn not to give away your stuff. It takes some practice. It takes some board vision not to give away your stuff. Let's take a look. Ricker wastes this guy, plays the Carlsbad. By the way, Vishnu wants me to cover the Carlsbad. I think, next week, I think that would be good for me to cover it. Notice every move is a developing move. That's what we want. And check this out. He's just going to go for it. Knight e5. F6, not a good move. Bam. And already I think White's firmly on top. A5 is a complete blunder. Queen d5, exclam. King h8. And the next move is the only move we're going to say where White blows it tactically. Okay? And this is a common trick. People sometimes have a hard time psychologically seeing that trick because it feels like, oh no, I'm losing my queen. But of course, we are winning the exchange. Okay, so queen c4. And now, honestly, the game becomes a little tricky because you're up a pawn and everything, but it's opposite sides castled, and Black's king is now safe. And so we're in a little bit of danger here. Rook b8. And the next move I don't like at all. And I'm going to try to explain. It looks natural to play d5. It looks like you're pushing your extra pawn. But it's a great example of the fact that in general, you don't want to put your pawns on the same color as your bishop because it limits the bishop's scope. And that being said, it's not totally easy what White should do, but I think a good start is definitely bishop c6, just to stick that piece nice and deep in there, and aim, if anything, for e4, e5. And notice that is aiming to put a pawn on the dark square. Black should be thinking about b5, b4, absolutely. He plays this. Rook e8, I think he should play b5. Nice move. So notice what Ricker did. He gave up a pawn technically, but his rooks are dramatically better. And what I love about this game is Ricker puts on the endgame virtuoso going on right here. Yeah, we're winning this thing. That b pawn is weak. Look at that. We're just going to come back and get it. Thank you very much. I'll even wait a second. And that's all over. So Ricker wins this game. Fantastic. Ricker, you're making progress, buddy. This is really good. You learned to, not give away pieces, not giving away tempi. And yeah, that's the first step in a chess player's career. And like Me and Vishnu, Ricker is an older dude, and it is simply harder to improve when you're older. So really, that's great. Okay. How's Chelsea doing? Oh, man. Oh, we lost. That's, you know why we lost? Because I wasn't watching. All right, let's move on to the next game. This is Philip. I think this is Philip's first time on the show. Queen e2. Kind of a weird move. And I think actually White loses himself here with this Queen e2. The original intention of Queen e2 was to play a Fischer-style King's Indian attack with d3, g3, bishop g2. And the point of Queen, there's some interesting points basically of having the Queen on e2. One of them is that the knight isn't yet committed to playing knight d2. So I think White loses his soul here a little bit by doing this. And I think a lot of times when you play an opening like Queen e2 and you don't really know why, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And he pushes his luck now with snagging a pawn on c5, which I think is too much, especially because White will owe us a move. He has to move the queen again now, and the position is now open. Okay, rook e8. After the game, I was thinking maybe a5 directly. All right, bishop e2, a5. Another move that I liked here too was knight e4 followed by bishop f6. That might be better. But okay, a5, b5, bishop e3, knight d7, snip, c4. Interesting position. My sense here was that this was a very complicated position and that we should try knight e6 here to mess with this strong bishop. If we don't mess with the bishop, it's very hard for me to see how we're going to break the position down. Bishop f5. Right, it feels like we're aiming for d3, but it doesn't. I'm not sure that would do all that much for us if we got to that d3 square. Rook d1. And I think White is a little bit better here, but he gets frisky now with queen e3. Which is just weird because things, as you note here, Philip, is that bishop d6, amongst other things, is just like, well, what do you know, what is the intention there? But now you play knight e6, and I feel like you're coming back to what you should have been aiming for earlier in that position. And I have no idea what is going on here. For example, after c takes d5. But this is really interesting with bishop b6, and it feels like White is in trouble, or excuse me, Black is in trouble. But then we're getting queen b8, and then this surprising bishop f6, and all of a sudden things are a little hokey. Rook ad1, knight f4. Yeah, all of a sudden White's the one in trouble. White, however, finds this, let's call it miraculous move, rook d8. So here we go. Knight e2, queen e2, queen d8, very good move. Rook d8, and because our rook on e8 is pinned, we got to do that. And now queen f1. Really interesting. I think White is lost, but we're going to need to play really accurately. My sense is that the move we should play here is not rook d3 as in the game, but bishop d3. But okay, here we go, rook d3. And what I like about what happens here is we gang up on Black with the rooks. Now, oftentimes what I hear from players is, even sometimes players who are like 2300, as they say themselves, well, I know that the two rooks are better than the queen, but I'm not good enough to do it. And I sometimes feel that way too. The queen can be so tricky, and the problem with the rooks, of course, is they need to coordinate. And the good news for black here is they really are well coordinated, and of course the bishops covering both colors, really powerful. Okay, I'm sure a little bit of time pressure happened here, but black really pushed it home with this whole sequence. Rook b3, nice move. There's no queen takes b3 because of rook g4. So snip, and we're just going to keep pushing it here. Yeah, nice. Thank you very much. We're not even going to give you the bishops. Nothing. And yeah, this is all over. G6, yeah, as you write, not a pleasant move to make. And there probably was a way in which not to do it. I'm going to guess that bishop d6 followed by bishop e5 was the way to go. So, and now it's getting a little funky. Now it's getting a little hairy. But you ended up finding this great move, bishop g3. And what do we got? We have a very standard mating net. And so, yeah, nice exposition of the two rooks against the queen. I'm moving a little quicker now. I'm a little sorry for it. But I knew those first couple games were so intense. But let's go through and look at DZ's game. DZ's white, he plays knight f3. And I do not like DZ's move here, knight g3. And let's talk about it a second. First of all, knight g3 loses a clean tempo. But more importantly, the knight on g3 is fundamentally a poor piece. It's going to need actually to come back into the game at some point. So you need to take on f6, son. Yeah, there might even be. Yeah, I think you need to take on f6. Maybe there's some trickery with knight here, but let's just say the normal move would be to take on f6. This system, by the way, against the Caro-Kann, I like it a lot. Knight f6 is a move, and notice that bishop f5, knight g3 would be kind of, it's like the analogous version to the other main line, bishop f5, in the Caro. And there, too, the knight generally needs to come back to e4 because it's bad. It's simply bad on g3. Okay, bishop g4. You gave that a funny-looking move, Mark, but honestly, it's very natural. This is what they want to do. They want to give up their light square bishop and then create a wall on the light squares. Okay, c3. Okay, I'm okay with that move. Queen d5, bishop e2. Okay. d4, good. And I like this, what you did with c3, d4 a lot. And let's talk about the long-term ideas here for both sides. What black really needs to be careful of is giving your bishop, your light square bishop, a clear diagonal. He needs to keep the game blocked. And on a practical level, it's often very hard to do to keep the game blocked up. And so you, on the other hand, obviously you need to make that bishop unblocked. But we can also say that you need to fix your knight on g3. And so, here's an interesting moment for you. And you write, after castles bishop e3, I couldn't find a way to develop the bishop. Bishop f4 will lose it. Right, it's a little difficult. You have to untangle. And there's more than one thing you can do. Let's say the simplistic way of playing this position, which might strike you as incredibly boring, would be to play knight h5. And the simple thing to recognize when you play knight h5 is that you are saying to yourself, right, my knight is bad on g3 and I gotta fix it. So it's true, yes, you want to bring out your bishop, but you gotta see the urgency of fixing the knight on g3 because it's a real screamer at the moment. Another thing I think is a little controversial, but it's a thought, would be to play bishop d3, snip, snip. And the claim here would be that when you come to e4, that the knight will be so annoying that it'll have to take you. Or at least that the knight will be so cool there that it'll be worth it to get those double pawns. I'm not sure I believe that, but that would be the thought. Grez writes, this looks like a queen d8 Scandi. Yes, it does. And this is also, as Move 11 writes, this is an incinerator. And what we mean by incinerator is a Nimzovitchian term where we're saying that later I want to play against the d pawn. And what DZ did correctly here was, instead of pushing the pawn to c4, where this guy d4 isn't protected, we are solid like a rock on c3. Let me speak a little bit to the boringness or seeming boringness of the knight h5 move. I'm sure this doesn't appeal to DZ's inclinations because the man wants to kill. But we're going to see he's in a position here, and he gets a little trouble because of it too, where it's not a kill position. It's one where you first need to recognize that you're down in time, but that you have a long-term strategic asset in the potential ability of this guy. And the potential ability of that guy means that moves like e5 and c5 from black are going to be controversial because they'll open up lines for that dude. So yeah, here I would say we have a small advantage. Yeah, it's nothing special, but it's a nice little small advantage. We can give black the massage here. All right, bishop e3. By the way, I have to admit that when I was a kid, I played lots of games where I didn't understand that my knight on g3 was bad. And in fact, let me just show the standard line. Let's just go in. Actually, we can get into it with this for a second. Let's say we transpose back into the standard line. I could go like this. This has been played a gazillion times. And white has several moves here. King b1, rook e1. But in general, the guy needs to play knight e4. And I'm mentioning it because I know that that was a hard thing for me to understand, that that was such a powerful move for white to play. Simply, and it's powerful because if you leave the knight on g3, he's terrible, right? So he's coming back in just to get rid of himself, like the move knight h5 did in the position we were looking at. Okay, back to the game. Where are we here? So, bishop g5, and you write, this is to provoke a pawn push to create a weakness. Now, it's a little bit of a weakness, but it's also a tempo. And wait a second, what happened here? This is a terrible move, knight d5. This has to be stressed. Knight d5 is a terrible move because he's now giving you the e4 square, and queen f3 was likewise a terrible move. Why is he fixing your bishop? Right before you were stuck, and you didn't want to take because he would nail you down with either CD or ED, and you didn't really want to play c4 because then the incinerator would hit the pawn. So here's some nice inaccuracies that you're getting. And now you said knight e4 was a funny move, and the computer said knight f5 is better. But let's just say hallelujah. Either way, either way, your knight has made it. He's arrived. Bishop b8. And here you immediately lose the knight. And DZ, I think one thing that we can talk about actually with you improving here is that my guess is that my just feeling is that you find these kind of slow positions difficult to manage. And I think for a lot of players they are. It feels like, can sometimes feel like, well, what am I playing for here, right? Like, what am I even trying to do? And let's think about it for a second. That knight on e4 is a good piece. And this knight on d7 is really not a great piece. So when you play knight c5, well, you know, now he's got the double pawns, and he's not winning or anything, but he's also kept the structure pretty blockaded, which he wants to play against your beautiful bishop, right? Let's look for a second. I haven't studied it too much, but let's look for a second of what you should do. And let's say, and this is actually important, that e5 might look threatening. It might seem like, oh, the guy is messing with me, with my structure here. And bigger picture, though, he is actually hurting himself by opening up the light squares, right? So I don't think you have anything to worry about here, really. You could do a lot of patient building moves. The simplistic one would be to play DE, knight e5, and just bishop e2. Yes, knight f5 would have been better, but you still, you see, you have the long-term edge here in this position with your bishops. And later, these light squares will likely become a problem. Okay, so now you're going to suffer a little bit. I'm not sure I understand knight e7. And c4 is a little bit of a funny move. Part of it is funny because what you're doing is you are playing with your weak pawns. But it's already a little bit hard to figure out what to do. Simple plans, though, are king f1, bishop e1. Knight is improved. Now he starts pushing you around, and now you're worse. And knight e6, he starts blowing it. What should he do? The guy should play bishop e5. He's wrecking you in the center now, right? And a4, I think, is an important mistake in this position, because now the guy should be dreaming about a5 to crack this, to give him that square. Yeah, looks strong to me. g6, I don't know what he's doing. You can feel that he's playing without a plan here. All right. This is interesting. I didn't like him taking there. a6, I like it in principle. But then there's that problem. That was really interesting. Let's go back. So the guy, in allowing all this, is really pushing his luck. Let's do this again. Snip, snip. Check. Unfortunately, this is okay. Bishop e1. Snip, snip, king d5. So first of all, we got to say the guy has pushed his luck, and it's really not so easy to figure out who's better and why. But like, let's say you just played this move. I think he's in danger. He better be a little bit worried, right? He better be a little bit worried. And going for it here was, it feels right. But I'm going to guess you missed that this bishop b8 happens, and then I guess you're lost, right? You do have a plan. You have a plan. Okay. c5 here. Okay, I have to admit I don't understand something. So in this position you write b8, terrible move, and I get it. So you want to play h4 with the hope that if c4 you have that move, I guess, right? And then you go back and forth and you get a draw, if that makes sense. But even there, the guy could play a5, right? Now maybe that's the thing with the computer or something that I don't understand, but b8 certainly looks like a natural move. And right, you're not in time anymore. I think. I think. King d1. Yeah, and it, at the very least, pretty spicy here. Holy moly. What happened here? Oh. Oh, Amit. Amit. I'm losing my mind here. Like almost 3 hours of getting people's names wrong and stuff. This guy is almost 2,300. Yeah, you had this guy. This all kinds of mistakes are happening. Like I said at the beginning, lots of mistakes in the end game, and I'm assuming there was some time pressure in here too. Um, yeah, I thought I can kick the bishop out with g3 and bishop f4. Maybe now I'll just go back just for a second here. It would be surprising, I think, if white was holding this position. There might be some way to hold it, but in general, this should be lost. Yeah, so were mistakes on both sides made? Likely. But like king d1, I'm assuming there's like a move, there's like a thing in the with the computer, right? That's why you're saying that. But king d1 looks pretty natural. Though, of course, it makes more sense to play king d2 just to shoulder the black king from coming in. And you're right, black should be now thinking of something like g5. And now, you're right, he's going to let you get the blockade over there. And yeah, he needs to play something like g5 so he can start his own play. Going over to d3 is also not ridiculous. Okay, I could talk about it forever. Let's move on. DZ, I'll spend more time next time. I'm sorry, I spent too much time in the early going. This is Farm Brewster. He is new to the show, and I encourage you guys to look at his notes. He says a number of interesting things here. And he is dropping pieces, as we see, like bishop c4, you got knight takes c3. But like we saw with Ricker, that's a skill you got to learn. Again, knight f4, I think, is dropping a piece because of bishop takes e6 check. And it looks like he is in some kind of trouble here. Hard to, now, all of a sudden, very hard position to evaluate. But there, Farm Brewster gets him. Bang! And now we got the business. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful win. And taking all the guy's stuff. Farm Brewster, if you submit again, I promise I will spend more time on your game. We have one more to cover. This is the famous Amit. And Amit, he wasn't on last month's show, and I was worried we had lost him. But here he comes. If you guys are not familiar with this show, Amit is going to submit a game where he really pops a guy. All right, you guys ready to see it? Here he goes. B3. Now, actually, Amit was black in this game. It says Amit on the bottom, but he was in fact black. And I'm going to say one thing about this position that hopefully will make sense to people. And that is, this setup is called the hippopotamus as white. It is actually an interesting practical thing to try. But the idea of the hippo is to remain entirely flexible until black commits. And in fact, it seems absolutely ridiculous, especially for a tempo fiend like myself. But what white should do now is play h3 and then on the next move play a3. It looks ridiculous. I'm sorry to even have to subject you to it. But the idea is to be flexible and be able to meet any push with a push pass. And the point I want to make is that is a terrible move for a hippo player. And the move that black should play immediately is d4. Now black is much better because we've shut this bishop down. And nota bene here, f4 is knight g4. So, okay, here we go. Let's see Amit crush this dude. Bishop b7. Dark square weaknesses. It's a little scary, honestly. White should be playing f4 right now. That's the dream of the King's Indian. Knight. No one knows why the knight goes back. Amit's light square bishop is his good bishop. He blundered that, and now he's in a little trouble. But he's going to get some play. Now, white should let him have the rook. Play f4 anyway. You need to play f4. Amit now has rooks of doom. And these kinds of positions Amit's really good at. You don't want to mess with him. e4. Bang. You ready for it? Bang. You ready for it? Bang. Oh, no. Look at that. Very nice move, Amit. Finishing him off. And he says, that useless bishop decides the game. And that it is indeed. Everyone, I will be back on Wednesday at, what is it going to be, 4 o'clock Eastern, just for the hourly show. I think I'm tending towards covering Vishnu's idea of talking about the Carlsbad, maybe doing a little bit of theory. I'd be interested in doing that myself. And then, of course, next month, it's not official yet, but I'm going to make it official soon. We'll get a post up from the chess.com gnomes. We should be looking at the 27th, unless there's some weird scheduling thing. And I just realized maybe that's going to be a Thanksgiving thing, but it should be okay, right? The Wednesday before. It's not Thursday. So that should be okay. So tentatively the 27th, I'll try to get the thread up tomorrow. All right, really enjoyed the stream. Thank you so much for being here. And I would say these notes are getting great. If you want to just take a look at some notes of people that are really well written, they're all on the site and they go months and months back. All right, thank you, everybody.